You picked up that cake. You put it in your cart. You brought it home. You served it to your kids. And here is what nobody told you. That thing sitting on your kitchen counter, wrapped in plastic, printed with a cheerful logo and a promise of home-style goodness, is not cake. It never was. It is a laboratory experiment dressed in frosting, a chemical cocktail poured into a mold and sold at a discount. And the scariest part? The brands doing this are the exact ones you have trusted for decades. Today, that trust ends. Let's talk. There's a question that almost nobody in the food industry wants you to ask. It is a simple question, honestly. 5 words. What is actually in this? Not what the front of the package says, not the cheerful font and the warm color palette and the vintage-style logo designed to make you feel like somebody's grandmother baked this for you. What is actually, chemically, molecularly, inside this thing you are putting into your body and calling dessert? Because here is what the research is now confirming. Loudly, consistently, and across multiple studies, the commercial cake industry in America, and increasingly across the globe, has been running one of the most successful long-term deceptions in the history of packaged food. And the proof is not hidden. It is sitting right there on the ingredient label. Most people just never read it, and the companies are counting on exactly that. Let us start with the ingredient that appears on nearly every mass-produced commercial cake label, regardless of brand, price point, or marketing claim. Bleached, enriched flour. The word enriched sounds generous, doesn't it? It sounds like someone added something good. But here is what actually happens. The flour is first stripped of its natural nutrients through heavy processing and chemical bleaching using agents like benzoyl peroxide or chlorine gas. Then, because the resulting product is nutritionally hollow, synthetic vitamins are added back in to replace what was destroyed. The food industry calls this enriching. Scientists call it removing the house and then selling you a painted fence. Your body gets almost none of the fiber, almost none of the natural mineral content, and almost none of the slow-digesting complex structure that real flour provides. What it gets instead is a fast-spike carbohydrate that hits your bloodstream like a freight train and collapses just as fast, leaving you tired, hungry again within the hour, and reaching for another slice. But the flour is just the beginning, and this is where it gets genuinely alarming. The first brand that demands your attention is Little Debbie. And before the nostalgia kicks in, before you think about Swiss rolls and Christmas tree cakes and childhood memories, let's look at what Little Debbie is actually selling. Little Debbie currently generates over $2 billion in annual revenue. That number alone should tell you something about the scale of consumption. But what exactly are people consuming at that scale? Their products, across the board, are characterized by some of the highest added sugar counts in the packaged snack market. A single serving of their double-decker oatmeal creme pies contains 40 grams of added sugar. That is nearly the equivalent of 10 sugar cubes in one snack. Their chocolate-based products contain synthetic food dyes, including Yellow 6 Lake and Blue 2 Lake, artificial colorants that are technically FDA approved but have been linked in peer-reviewed research to behavioral disruption in children and are banned or restricted in multiple European countries. The fiber content in nearly every Little Debbie product? Functionally zero. The protein content? Almost non-existent. What this means nutritionally is that you are consuming a product with enormous caloric density, zero satiety, and a chemical profile that your liver has to work overtime to process. And you are giving this to children by the millions every single day. Think about what that means, not just for one snack, for an entire generation of snacking habits built on this foundation. And now let us move to Hostess. Hostess is perhaps the most culturally embedded cake brand in American history. When the company went bankrupt in 2012, there were actual protests. People were genuinely grieving Twinkies. But here's the clinical picture that grief obscured. Hostess Ho-Hos, per serving, contain 40 grams of sugar. They contain 8 grams of saturated fat, which approaches your entire daily recommended limit in a single package. The fiber? 1 gram. The protein? Barely enough to register. Their old-fashioned donuts, a product marketed almost entirely toward children, contain added sugar equivalent to 72% of the recommended daily limit in just 3 small donuts. 3. And the saturated fat in their various cake products consistently pushes against daily thresholds without providing a single compensating nutritional benefit. Hostess products are engineered for one thing: palatability, maximum sweetness, maximum texture satisfaction, minimum actual nutrition. They are designed by food scientists to hit what researchers in the field call the bliss point, the precise ratio of sugar, fat, and salt that creates compulsive overconsumption. This is not accidental. This is strategy. This is engineering. And it has been working for decades. Here's where the story deepens. Entenmann's carries an image of heritage. The brand began with William Entenmann himself delivering fresh baked goods door to door in a horse-drawn wagon in the early 1900s. That image, warm, artisanal, neighborhood bakery, is part of the brand's psychological architecture to this day. But what you're actually buying at the supermarket in 2025 has almost nothing in common with that origin story. According to independent nutritional analysis, every Entenmann's crumb cake and nearly every product in their lineup is built on a foundation of chemically bleached white flour, inflammatory vegetable oils, and high fructose corn syrup, a sweetener that has been linked in published research to accelerated fatty liver disease, elevated triglycerides, and a particularly problematic effect on the hormones that regulate hunger and satiety. The Entenmann's Cinnamon Crunch Loaf Cake delivers 27 grams of sugar per slice and 0 dietary fiber, meaning every calorie arrives as a blood sugar spike with nothing to slow it down. Their plain glazed donut holes provide 18 grams of sugar per 4-whole serving, with again 0 grams of fiber. A class action lawsuit was once filed against Entenmann's for misleading consumers about the nature of their products. The suit was ultimately dismissed, but the underlying critique, that Entenmann's trades on an image of freshness and home baking while delivering preservative-laden industrial products, was never convincingly refuted. And this is where everything changes. Because when you look at what these brands have in common, a pattern emerges that goes beyond individual products. It becomes a system. Betty Crocker's Pineapple Upside Down Cake Mix stands as a case study in how a familiar, trusted name can mask a deeply problematic product. A single serving of the prepared mix and topping contains 40% of your daily recommended saturated fat intake. 40%. From one serving of one part of one cake. This is before you add any frosting, before you add ice cream, before you account for the fact that a serving size on a cake mix box is routinely optimistic to the point of fiction. The ingredient list includes high fructose corn syrup, artificial flavors, and multiple forms of refined sugar stacked on top of each other, a technique food scientists call sugar stacking, that allows manufacturers to list different sweeteners separately so none of them appears as the first ingredient, even when their combined effect dominates the product. Read that again. They split the sugar into different chemical forms, specifically so the label looks less alarming. Then there is the artificial dye crisis that is not getting nearly enough mainstream coverage. In 2024, food safety investigations found cancer-associated compounds in certain commercial red velvet and black forest cakes due to the excessive use of synthetic colorants. Red 40, one of the most widely used artificial food dyes in commercial baking, has been connected in research to hyperactivity and behavioral problems in children. Red 3 has been classified as a possible carcinogen and was actually banned by the FDA in early 2024 in food products after decades of approving its use. Yellow 5 and Yellow 6 have been associated with allergic reactions and have restricted status in multiple countries outside the United States. Blue 1 and Blue 2 appear on ingredient lists of countless commercial cake products marketed directly at children. These dyes serve exactly one purpose. They make the product look more visually appealing in the packaging. They do nothing for taste. They do nothing for nutrition. They exist entirely to increase purchase intent, and they achieve this at a potential cost to human health that researchers are still fully quantifying. But here is what the mainstream food conversation is consistently missing. The real story is not just about individual bad ingredients in isolation. The real story is about what happens when these ingredients combine at scale, consumed repeatedly across years of dietary habit. A child who eats one Little Debbie product has consumed an alarming amount of artificial dye and added sugar in one sitting. A child who eats these products regularly throughout childhood has been subjected to a cumulative chemical load that no long-term study has ever fully endorsed as safe. The American Heart Association reports that adults in the United States already consume an average of 77 grams of added sugar daily, more than 20 grams above the FDA's own recommended limit. And a massive percentage of that sugar is coming directly from products like the ones we have been discussing. This is not fringe science. This is the mainstream nutritional consensus, stated plainly. The commercial cake industry's most popular products are a significant driver of sugar overconsumption at a population level, with downstream consequences for obesity, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. Now let us go deeper, because there is one more layer to this that almost nobody talks about. Walmart's in-store bakery cakes have been ranked at the absolute bottom of multiple independent blind taste tests in 2024 and 2025, including tests where family panels with no brand knowledge ranked 10 or more supermarket cakes simultaneously. The verdict was consistent and decisive. Walmart's bakery cakes not only failed on taste, but also on texture and structural integrity. But here is what the taste tests are not equipped to capture: the ingredient quality behind those failures. Commercial supermarket bakery cakes that rank at the bottom of taste tests are almost universally the same cakes that rank at the bottom of ingredient quality. This is not coincidental. When you replace real butter with palm oil or partially hydrogenated vegetable shortening, the cake tastes worse. When you replace real vanilla with synthetic vanillin, the cake tastes worse. When you use the cheapest possible bleached flour and the minimum viable quantity of eggs, the cake collapses in texture. The taste failures and the ingredient failures are the same failure, expressed differently. The grocery store chains that prioritize margin compression over ingredient quality produce cakes that fail both tests simultaneously. And they continue to sell them because most consumers are making their purchasing decisions based on price and convenience rather than quality or composition. This is not chaos. This is a business model. Now let us talk about David's Cookies Mile High Peanut Butter Cake, available at Costco. This is a product that sounds indulgent and premium and special occasion worthy, and it is popular. But when you look at what it is made of, you find red 40, corn syrup, palm oil, mono, and diglycerides, and a list of chemical additives that reads less like a bakery receipt and more like a pharmaceutical inventory. Palm oil is particularly worth examining. It is one of the most widely used fats in commercial baking because it is cheap, stable, and extends shelf life dramatically. It is also high in saturated fat and has been consistently identified in cardiovascular research as a fat that raises LDL cholesterol levels. Mono and diglycerides are emulsifiers. They keep oil and water from separating in processed products, but they can contain residual trans fats even when a product is labeled as zero trans fat, because FDA regulations only require disclosure when trans fat exceeds 0. 5 grams per serving. This means a product can legally claim 0G trans fat while still delivering a measurable dose across a full serving. That legal threshold is a crack in the regulatory framework that the industry exploits routinely, and here is where the story turns. Because not everything in the cake market is this dark. There are brands and sources doing this differently, and the contrast is sharp enough to illuminate exactly what is at stake. Pepperidge Farm's layer cake line uses real eggs, real butter, and real milk. Their frozen cakes are built on traditional layer cake architecture with actual dairy fat and minimal artificial flavoring in several key products. Are they perfect? No. Independent taste tests in 2024 found some structural inconsistencies in their frozen cake line, with layers sometimes separating during transport. But the ingredient list comparison between a Pepperidge Farm layer cake and a Little Debbie Swiss roll is the difference between a photograph and a painting of a photograph. One is attempting to replicate something real. The other has entirely abandoned the reference point. Suzy Cakes operates on a model that should be the industry standard but has become remarkable precisely because it is so rare. Every single cake sold by Suzy Cakes is baked from scratch, daily, in the back of each individual bakery location. No central commissary, no par baking in industrial facilities, and then shipping semi-finished products to stores for a final heat cycle designed to fill the air with the scent of fresh baking. Real butter. Fresh eggs. Simple, high-quality ingredients that you can identify without a chemistry degree. The result is a cake that tastes like what cake is supposed to taste like, because it is made the way cake is supposed to be made. The comparison with industrial brands is not subtle. It is immediate. Any person who eats both in the same week understands the difference in one bite. Arista represents a different model, a commercial-scale producer that has committed to clean label standards in a way that most of their industrial competitors have not. Their frozen bakery program uses a flash freeze delivery model that replaces the need for heavy preservative loads with cold chain logistics. Their products feature premium ingredients including Belgian chocolate, fresh berries, and pastry cream. They have pledged to transition toward natural colorants, non-GMO flour, and free-range eggs across their product lines. This is still commercial scale cake production, but it demonstrates that the choice between scale and quality is not as binary as the industry's worst offenders pretend. It is a choice, and it is a choice that can be made differently. What most people are not seeing is that the cake industry's problem is fundamentally a transparency problem before it is an ingredient problem. The ingredient problems exist because transparency is not required, not enforced, and not prioritized. Consumers who read labels make different choices. The industry knows this. The positioning of logos, the size of ingredient text, the emotional design of packaging, all of it is calibrated to minimize the moment of critical reading that would change purchasing behavior. The ingredient list on most commercial cakes is printed in the smallest legible type, on the back or bottom of the packaging, after every other marketing element has already done its psychological work. This is not an accident of design. It is an intention of design. According to informed sources in the food technology and consumer health research community, the gap between what commercial cake brands advertise and what they actually deliver has never been wider than it is right now. The advertising still invokes tradition, quality, and home-style baking. The ingredient lists tell a story of margin optimization, shelf life extension, and synthetic chemical load that would be unrecognizable to any actual home baker. The American consumer is paying for the image and receiving something profoundly different from what that image promises. The sugar numbers alone should reframe this entire conversation. The Cheesecake Factory's carrot cake contains 116 grams of sugar in a single slice. The Chocolate Tower Truffle Cake at the Cheesecake Factory delivers 1,770 calories, 111 grams of fat, and 60 grams of saturated fat in one serving, exceeding 300% of the daily recommended saturated fat limit. Olive Garden's chocolate lasagna dessert contains 86 grams of sugar, which is more than 20 teaspoons in a single dish. These are not edge cases. These are flagship products at major restaurant chains, served daily to millions of people who have no idea what they are actually consuming, because the menu describes it in poetry, not chemistry. And what happens when a generation grows up with this as their baseline? When the taste memory for what cake is supposed to be is constructed entirely from products built on high fructose corn syrup, artificial dye, palm oil, and bleached flour, the reference point disappears. The comparison becomes impossible because there's nothing left to compare it to. When Susie Cakes or a local artisan bakery sells a cake made with real butter and fresh eggs, some people taste it and think it tastes different. Off? Wrong. Not because the artisan cake is inferior, but because their palate has been calibrated to synthetic flavor profiles for so long that authenticity has become unfamiliar. That is perhaps the deepest damage. Not the individual health impact of a single slice, but the systematic recalibration of what people believe food is supposed to taste like, feel like, and be made of. So here's where this leaves you. The brands to avoid are identifiable. The ingredient patterns that signal a product built for profit over health are readable once you know what to look for. Bleached enriched flour, high fructose corn syrup, palm oil, artificial dyes, red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, blue 1, blue 2, mono and diglycerides, partially hydrogenated oils hiding behind zero trans fat labels, sugar stacking across multiple listed sweetener names. These are the fingerprints of industrial cake production at its worst, and they appear repeatedly on the labels of the most popular, most trusted, most aggressively marketed cake brands on the market today. The question that remains unresolved is not what is in these cakes. That information exists. It is publicly available on every label. The question is, what happens next? Whether the pressure of consumer awareness shifts the equation, whether regulatory frameworks catch up to the research on artificial dyes and synthetic fat profiles, whether the industry's most problematic brands face sufficient market consequence to actually change their formulas, whether the next generation of buyers makes different choices at different price points for different reasons, or whether a century of successful deception continues uninterrupted, whether the cheerful logos and the nostalgic packaging and the discount price points keep working, whether the ingredient list stays in the smallest possible font on the back after the damage is already done. The cake industry is counting on you not asking the 5-word question. What is actually in this? Now you know to ask it. The more important question is whether the answer will change anything at all.